Verse 271. Let one not think of the manas, individual signs and reality, from the point of view of permanency and impermanency, nor let him think in his meditation of birth and no birth. Previous verse talked about propositions and how a proposition is no more than a proposition. And Buddhism itself is full of propositions. It's full of meditation exercises and of things to contemplate. So, for example, permanency and impermanency. All things are impermanent. Now, these three terms, manas, individual, signs and reality, this is the normal process of cognition. Manas is the discriminating mind. It sees something out of everything else. It focuses on something. So, for example, you might be focusing on this video to the exclusion, more or less, of everything else around. So, mind is discriminating this video. Your ears, hopefully, are listening to the words. So you're discriminating that sound amongst other sounds, according to individual signs, according to the idea that there's a person here responsible for this video and using it as a medium of communication, certain tone to the voice, certain visual appearance, and so on, the individual signs. And this is what contributes to your reality. So this is the everyday process of cognition. And the Buddhist is encouraged to regard all things as impermanent, in contrast to notions that they might have of certain things being permanent. For example, you don't believe in an individual soul, an individual permanent soul, an immortal soul. If it's a Buddhist, you don't believe in that. You don't believe in a permanent creator God either. So we have to be quite clear about that if you're a Buddhist. But here we're being advised not to think in such terms. And again, I would relate this back to the previous verse, which says that a proposition is nothing more than a proposition. It is not a statement about reality. That's the point. Because reality is to do with suchness, what I would call a sense of being. The last clause talks about not thinking in his meditation of birth and no birth. And thinking here would be some kind of contemplation. Birth and no birth. Well, this could be understood in terms of escaping from the cycle of rebirth, of birth and rebirth, of escaping from samsara into nirvana. Or it could be a contemplation exercise. There are certain Buddhists who seem to be aware of the vibrations of existence, things coming into being and disappearing from being. This could be the basis of a meditation practice, observing these fluctuations of sensations coming and going, birth and no birth. In fact, I remember reading somewhere about how the Buddha's awareness was such that he was aware of the fluctuations of the atoms of existence coming and going so many trillion times a second. It's one of these rather dubious statements which, even if the Buddha had that awareness, how could he actually enumerate the number of times something was coming and going per second? So anyway, you can really get sucked into these things. In fact, I was trying to find the reference for that particular number. And I started looking through some of my old books on traditional Buddhist practices and meditations. And there's so many things you can get involved in. There's so many things you can practice, especially if you're trying to follow the Eightfold Path. And again, there's nothing wrong with this in itself. It'd be nice if more people thought about the sort of lifestyle that they lead and how they can change it for the better. Change it for the better in terms of consideration for others. But this isn't what we're interested here as enlightenment practitioners. What I found as I was looking back at these books, as I was thinking, oh, it'd be good to look into this a bit more and read this a bit more, maybe do some more of the practices. And I got this big volume of Indian Buddhism. Yes, it'd be good to read this and get back to Buddhist basics. You just get sucked into this kind of thing. Everyday reality is bad enough. You get sucked into that. But you don't want to get sucked into Buddhist reality either. Unless you want to be a Buddhist, of course. But this has got nothing to do with enlightenment. It's got nothing to do with suchness and knowledge of mind only, which was mentioned in the previous verse. So the next few verses, well, there's quite a few verses, are really bombardment against lots of Buddhist ideas. It's a barrage shooting down loads of Buddhist propositions, because we don't want to get sucked into these. We don't want to get hung up on them. So verse 272 tells us, they do not discriminate reality. And this is the yogin, or the enlightenment practitioner. Vijnana rises from Alaya. The oneness of meaning thus taking place is not to be known by a dually operating mind. The Vijnana arises from Alaya. Means that, well, the Vijnana is the mind that formulates these propositions, that formulates ideas, notions, beliefs, concepts, systems. But what we are interested in is the context within which these things arise. This is the Alaya. We can understand this in this context as mind only, as suchness. So we're stepping back from our own mind. We're stepping back into awareness. And if you've ever experienced a moment of stillness, then you can do this. You can do this. You might not be able to do it at every moment of the day. So you have to be patient with yourself. And when the moment arises, step into it. Don't celebrate it. Don't think about it. Just step into it. If there is an inclination to think about it and to exult in it, then observe that too. Observe it. Observe your mind operating at its deepest level. And in observing, you're no longer identifying with it. You're stepping back. So this is the oneness of meaning. It cannot be known by the mind itself, by the thinking mind, by the Vijnana mind. I'm tempted just to read through the next few verses quite quickly. But I think it might be worth giving them some more consideration in the next video.